Welcome to Roundtail Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Well, it is post-Thanksgiving,
Yes,
and I guess technically almost Advent.
yes. Happy New Year. A new
Happy
Christian
New
year.
Year. Oh, yes, I always forget that. Every
A
time.
little detail in the Christian calendar,
I
but
know. Happy New Year.
Happy
This
New
is so
Year.
fun.
Yeah.
And we are also in the transition time of changing over to our new sermon series in our What Matters Most series. In November, we were looking at gratitude.
Mhm.
And now we are looking at the theme, the value, the joy of love.
Love.
Which is sort of funny because if you think about, to me, I always think like, oh, well, since we did gratitude for November, should we have saved love for February for Valentine's Day? But we have
Right.
something very special for February. So, and then actually, as we've been talking sort of offline about this, love for December makes perfect sense. And we, of course, have that poem, Love Came Down at Christmas. Love, all
Mhm.
lovely, love divine.
Yep.
I was telling you just a moment ago that I had been really tempted because there are, if you go and look at, sheet music shops and online resources, there are hundreds of
Mm.
settings of that poem. People
Mhm.
love it. It sets itself to music so well. It sings so well. And I was so tempted to do just a different setting every week in Advent. I was like, we'll just do it like 4 times. They'll just be different anthem settings. And then I pictured my choir looking at me like, is that really what you want to do? Really?
Yeah.
Are you
Once was enough.
sure? Are you sure?
It's
Well,
beautiful, but maybe
it's
not that.
beautiful, yeah. And also there's so many other great texts to sing.
Yes. Yes.
So I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And
We'll
the
let it go.
imaginary conversation I had with my choir in my head, which is a thing.
Yeah, you want to create love there, right?
Yes, exactly. See, there you go. There you go. So what are we? So we're talking about love today, and you had some particular characters of the Bible you wanted to bring into our conversation.
Yeah, so these are the usual suspects. They are very much a part of the Christmas story. We wouldn't have a Christmas story without them, is actually
Mm-hmm.
the bottom line here. Um, just to back up for a second, so love all lovely, love divine, love came down at Christmas time. And that love in the Christian tradition is revealed through this infant Jesus the Christ. And of course, the whole story of his life becomes this ongoing revelation of love, right? What does
Mm-hmm.
love look like? And we get to see that in action as his life unfolds. But love is also revealed in these stories through other people. And in some ways, Jesus will point to them as being really remarkable examples of love. One of them being John the Baptist. John the Baptist, was a real fan, or I should say, Jesus was first a fan of John the Baptist and constantly pointed to him as someone who was an extraordinary individual. But of course, where would Jesus have been without Mary, his mother,
Mm-hmm.
and then his wonderful adoptive father, Joseph, who took him under his wing, even though uh, he was really looking for a way out of the drama as soon as it got started. So, so I thought it might be interesting to kind of lift up these three characters. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
start with John the Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
who's such a angular, rough, in some ways challenging, even caustic figure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not exactly what you might think about when you think about the word love.
Uh-huh.
He might not be the first image to come to mind. But John the Baptist is really important because in the Gospel of Mark, there is no birth story. No camels, no wise men, no Mary, nothing. Jesus just appears fully adult, and there he is. And John the Baptist welcomes him into the whole, drama. John the
Yeah.
Baptist will come into play in the other in another gospel as a child, and we learned a little bit
Hmm.
about him and his mother. But I just thought that, sometimes love is revealed through people who may not seem to be love all lovely, love divine, right?
Hmm.
What we might say rough around the edges.
Yeah.
And so I think so to start off with, I want to lift up John the Baptist as an example of love.
Of love. I have to say, I was taking notes, typing my little notes to myself before we were recording, and you were like, "Yeah, we're gonna bring up three people: Joseph, Mary," and I was like, You're like John the Baptist, and it was like it was like a record had scratched in my
Not
head.
my oh, perfect image.
What? Who? Well,
Yep.
really? Him? See?
Doesn't seem right somehow, right?
No.
We
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
love in
Yeah.
that way.
Well, and I have this image, and I feel like that's come from your descriptions of John the Baptist as being a little like it's a rough around the edges is an understatement of what he is in my head. His hair is like a little like he's got like leaves sticking out of his hair
Oh
in my
yes,
head. Like he's
yes.
just kind of like could not care less about his appearance. He's all about action and
Hmm.
speaking against injustices and speaking truth to power. And
Hmm.
he's out there like fighting the good fight. And he's just looks a little nuts
Yeah,
in my head.
he's on the edge for sure, right?
Yeah.
And the kind of interesting thing about him is he's literally on the edge. In order to get to him, you have to go out into the desert.
Yeah.
And so, he begins this whole tradition in Christianity, which continues actually up to this day, of people withdrawing from society and
Mm.
living out in the wilderness. And these people actually became known as desert Christians, desert
Hmm.
fathers and mothers. They all trace their lineage back to John the Baptist. But I think you've picked up a couple of points that are really important. John the Baptist demonstrated a kind of lifestyle that was completely counter to the Roman Empire. He lived
Hmm.
off the land, he ate locusts and wild honey, not exactly a standard diet. He dressed in clothing which made people think of the prophet Elijah, who had come hundreds of years before him into prominence.
Oh,
So he was
interesting.
reminding people, because Elijah was another person who spoke truth to power, spoke out
Hmm.
against injustice. And so I think John the Baptist, by the way, whose story is traditionally told always during the second Sunday of Advent, usually first or
Hmm.
second Sunday, we always hear about John the Baptist. It's how the year begins. Kind of a rough way to begin the year with somebody, as counter, as John can be to the prevailing
Hmm.
message of Christmas.
Hmm.
Yet he's bringing this message that love is about creating a whole new world. And that world
Mm.
is set in opposition to all of the injustices and abuses of power that we still see in the world today. So that's
Yeah.
why my vote is always for John the Baptist as a great lover. He's the one out there carrying the banner. He'd probably hate everything that I'm saying right now, but there he was, and he basically introduces Jesus to the world.
Yeah. He sounds like this is going to be a really tenuous connection, but I'm going with it. He sounds like his love language was action,
Yes.
acts of service. Like he was a guy that loved through making things happen by, by the way that he was living his life and his action. I lovingly say about my mother-in-law that she loves through food.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way she loves on you. She's just like here, and she's just, that's her
Yes.
outpouring of generosity and love and care. And John the Baptist seems like he was very like action, like he was getting things done, even though it's sort of funny because I feel like that there's like a disconnect between this withdrawal, but also this
Uh-huh.
quite revolutionary, rebellious
Mm-hmm.
spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know sort of why he ended up he withdrew? Because I'm so if Jesus knew about him and was such a fan. I'm
Mm-hmm.
fascinated that like he was out being Obi-Wan Kenobi in the woods kind of a
Right. Yeah.
situation.
Great image. There was a movement within Judaism at the time, maybe more than one movement, to, in a sense, pull back and live a very pure, today we would use the word ascetical, which is a very lean spirited kind of life,
Hmm.
devotion to God, devotion to a very ethical way of life. And there is some very strong feeling that John may have been connected to that movement, but
Mm.
not to the point of completely separating himself, because obviously he wanted people, he had a message, which is that a new day was dawning and the Messiah was on the threshold, about to walk over the horizon and enter this new world and call people to this new way of life. But he made people work for that. He made people come out into the desert and then be baptized. And
Hmm.
I think his singular contribution in some way was language. He spoke in what we would consider today very harsh terms about
Mm.
this new language. You know, essentially, he threatened people, and we don't find that as productive these days. But you know, I've been reading. This is going to be a ginormous stretch, but I've been reading the biography of Elon Musk thanks to my book group.
I was
Probably
wondering
not
when
a,
that was going to come up in the podcast.
probably not a book I would have read on my own. But
Uh-huh.
in the way that he conducts his business, it's a very
Mhm.
John the Baptist, mentality that there's a storm surge of language always in
Uh-huh.
Elon Musk when he's been working with his assembly lines, churning out these Tesla vehicles or the rockets that his companies have helped to create, and it's constantly keeping people's feet to the fire. And I use that
Mm.
language deliberately because John also called upon the language of fire in his words. You know, we don't like that language in the church. We see that as threatening, as abusive, as shame producing. But
Sure.
if we go back to the language itself and ask ourselves, well, what is at the heart of what he was saying? What was he
Mhm.
really trying to do? In a sense, it was a very strong wake-up call,
Mm.
challenging people to step away from an experience of life that was less than connected to the kingdom of God. And I think in that sense, we have to give John the Baptist a lot of space because there was an urgency. And for someone in his position, living in an occupied country,
Mhm.
feeling that the forces of injustice were arrayed around him, um,
Mhm.
that's why he brings such a strong message. And of course, he was outspoken towards the local political authorities, and that's what got him killed
Yeah.
because he spoke out about someone's marriage arrangement, which he thought was an unethical arrangement, and that eventually landed him in jail, and he was executed in jail. So that had a big impact on Jesus, later in his life. And I think it's just important to lift John up as a voice, as as strange and strident as it may sound. I think there's
Mhm.
love in there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of today's fight for climate justice, for
Hmm.
climate uh, change and impact there that, sometimes it's not always gentle language. I mean, our friend Bill McKibben spoke very earnestly and very bluntly about what we're facing as a
Hmm.
globe. And I don't think any of us would have said that that didn't come from. I think we all know that comes from a place of love, of deep love for humanity, deep love for
Hmm.
our earth and all of creation. It makes me. I feel like there's a real connection there
Hmm.
for sometimes it doesn't feel like you have time for
Mm.
genteel language when
Right.
things feel urgent or scary or so important. You feel like you need to get loud in not only volume but in timbre and in language about what really matters.
I think that's well said. And, if we want to hear even more strident language than that from which Bill McKibben, talks about, all we have to do is listen to Greta Thunberg because
Hmm.
she's much more aggressive in her speech.
She's
And so
great.
here's a young woman who's saying, the clock is ticking. And she
Hmm.
she often, I notice at the end of her speeches, will say, I know you're not paying attention to me. I know you're not listening to me. I know you're not going to make any decisions because of this, but I'm going to continue to talk anyway. And
Mm.
so it's that same kind of drive, And I came across a book years ago. It was a collection of sayings from people like John the Baptist and Greta Thunberg and Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was a leader in El Salvador many years ago, also a great voice for the poor and the impoverished. And the title of the book was called The Violence of Love. And
Mm.
to think about love as being something that uproots the current order of things in
Hmm.
order to bring a new world into being. And, to me, it's a little segue into our second character for Christmas love, which is Mary
Hmm.
and the beautiful poem Magnificat. Do we ever really listen to that? It's about, uprooting the world. She makes reference to the rich in that language
Right.
and how those who've enjoyed life it's all going to be turned upside down in her view.
Yeah.
And she'll say, God has sent the rich empty away because it's a new world and he has filled the hungry with good things.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like John the Baptist, but if you were listening to those words or reading those words as a person who's hungry every day, who doesn't have great resources, then you'd have to think, hey, she's speaking to me. She's
Mm.
talking, there's good news on the horizon. Here's somebody
Yeah.
who acknowledges me, cares about me, and shows me that God cares about me.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly was the ministry of Jesus, right? Consistently reaching out to the most impoverished, not turning anyone away, but
Hmm.
definitely with a bias towards those who were most vulnerable.
I love that the Magnificat has become such a close to me beloved piece of language, especially because I was more involved in the Anglican Church and the Episcopal Church in previous years, and evensong was a weekly occurrence in my life for a long, long time. And
Uh-huh. Yep.
a part of evensong is the Magnificat is sung.
Yeah.
And so you hear it every week, not just one Sunday in Advent. And so
Wow.
I know any Episcopal friend could probably sing it, sing it or recite it from memory. It's as dear as the Lord's Prayer, I think, for a lot of people. And um, it's such an optimistic
Mm.
piece of
Mhm.
language. It's joy, but it's like joy tied with love. It's not like
Mm.
it's not like this wild thing. It's this very tender joy, and always in the way it's set often.
Yes.
There's always sort of this, you get these really rising lines in a lot of the settings, because it's just this outpouring of joy, of love, of hope for the
Mm-hmm.
future.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a beautiful thing. Um,
That combination of joy and love. I'm not remembering the name of the remarkable man. I think his nonprofit organization is called something like World Kitchen
oh,
and
World Central Kitchen.
World Central Kitchen. Thank
Yeah.
you. Right? What a remarkable ministry that is. I think
Yeah.
that's the right word to use for it. And they're active all over the world right now. I was listening to an interview with the founder of the program, and he just exudes joy and exudes love,
Yeah.
genuine love. And when he puts a plate of food in a hungry person's hands, whether that was in Puerto Rico, after a hurricane, which is the time I happened to see an interview with him, or they're doing work now. I believe they're trying to work in Gaza. I'm not entirely sure about that, but they're
Hmm.
they're working in so many places across the world where people are in desperate need of food. And
Yeah.
they don't just create these little plates of food, it's a lot of nourishment, but it's served with love.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine years ago talking to me. We were in his house at his kitchen table, and he said, "I can't ever remember a meal that in this house that wasn't served with love."
Mm.
And what a beautiful comment. He was making that comment about the life that he and his spouse had shared together over many decades, but never a
Mhm.
meal that was served without love.
That's so
And
beautiful.
so I think that's definitely Mary. Mary is that example of a person who, as you say, full of joy that her life has been regarded when no one else had counted her at all, right? She, in
Mhm.
the estimation of the Roman Empire, didn't even register as a blip on the screen.
Mhm.
And yet, through God, she felt acknowledged and
Mhm.
affirmed and
Mhm.
called to be the mother of this child, through whom we would also continue to see the revelation of love.
Mhm.
And I guess that the thing that strikes me, you put John the Baptist and Mary together, kind of an odd pairing, but they both have that very strong message. And then you get the third character, Joseph, who's kind of looking for the back door. He gets pulled
Yeah.
into this drama and he's saying, "No, thank you very much. I
Yeah.
I would prefer to stay quiet on the sidelines, and I'm going to find some decent way to separate myself from Mary and this baby, which actually would not have
Mhm.
been very helpful to her at all. Thank you very
No.
much."
Mhm.
But his sleep is disturbed by an angel who says, "You know what? You got to change your mind. You've got to take this child as your own, take this woman as your wife." And essentially, he adopts Jesus and
Yeah.
becomes his father, and then has to uproot his entire life when they become refugees, because then, Jesus is under attack by Herod, and so they have to leave and flee. And so it's just interesting how his love is maybe in some ways the most practical kind of love. It's the
Mm.
we've got to get out of town now love. Otherwise, we may not see chapter two of this story.
Yeah.
And I think about him when I think about all of the Afghan evacuees who came to our country in our part of the state, in particular, 2 years
Mhm.
ago, and the journey that they made, and everything uprooted and leaving everything behind to start a new life. And that's essentially what Joseph does. So there's
Yeah.
another revelation of love.
I also think going back to his first decision, that there is a difference there between what to him seemed right and
Yes.
what
Yes.
was loving and what was actually an
Right.
action of love. That
Yep.
he thought he was doing like the right thing, like I'll dismiss, and like this is like I'll dismiss her quietly. Isn't that what
Right.
it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, we'll just, she'll be a single mom, but it's fine. Like, we won't like shame her or get her like arrested for it. I'm like, whoa, whoopie doo.
Yeah.
Um,
Not
but
helping.
not no. But he thinks he's like doing like the right thing,
He
like the
was.
societally accepted
Yes.
thing, the done thing, as it
Hmm.
were.
Yep.
And that this angel's like, hold on, that's not, no, that's not love. That's not love at all. That's not
Right.
what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that's interesting that there's like a disconnect between like what he thinks he's doing is right and what actually is an action of
Right.
love, you know?
And I think that's a great theme that often gets picked up in literature or in movies. It's the story of the person who thinks, "Look, I'm doing as much as I can. All right, look, I
Hmm.
helped you once already. Don't keep coming back to me." And then who gets asked again and then gets more involved in someone else's story and winds up helping even more. There's
Hmm.
actually a term that's used for this for Joseph. It's called the greater righteousness or the higher righteousness. So even though,
Mm.
as you say absolutely correctly, he thinks he's being righteous, he thinks he's
Mhm.
doing the right thing. I would say maybe technically, based on the law, the religious law that he's observing at the time, there is a sense in which that's right. He's right so
Mhm.
far as it goes. Then the question is, how can we push that? How can we go to the higher righteousness, the greater righteousness? And I think that is a really interesting message for churches right now,
Mhm.
because we've been churches can settle. You know how there's a phrase, like don't settle, but
Mhm.
churches can settle. We get into a comfort zone. We like the traditions that we've had. We like the way things are, and we settle into that comfortable place.
Mhm.
And the problem is that I think that what's being revealed through these three stories, these three people we've talked about, is actually an expression or expressions of love that pull each of them into, I would say, into risky places.
Mhm.
I think for a very long time, the church has presented itself as a place where you don't have to take risks, where you can
Mm.
avoid that, where you can be safe. We certainly want people to feel safe and loved in our churches, but don't we also want them to feel challenged and drawn out into places of calling that may be exhausting. They could be challenging to us in many different ways. And
Mm-hmm.
we've often, I think we see historically that change doesn't come without some element of risk, putting
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and our beliefs on the line. And I just think those three people are so remarkable in the way that they all, you know, rose beyond themselves to this
Mm-hmm.
higher vision of love or righteousness or compassion.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for those thoughts, Ed. Those are going to stick with
Thank,
me all week. This
thank you.
idea of challenge is so, I think, so important. So we all thank you for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org. Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.